In part 1 of my cottage garden tour, I found myself in a few other side quest adventures, but thankfully we got through Iokai where many tropicals and serendipity reside. Next, we made our way through Aurora Boulevard where all the sleepy trees were going on about their day, and now we've wandered into Citrus Lane. So let's meet all its residents.
Next up is my ruby red grapefruit, which I need to go through and prune back because it does have some growth, but I feel like it's growing kind of wonky now, and I want to make sure to maintain a nicer shape. I'm just waiting for the days to cool down a bit before I go in and prune it. Next to that is my improved Meyer lemon, and this one also looks really beautiful. This one isn't quite as tall, it's more so wide, but it's loaded with fruit, and it's probably one of my favorite citrus trees just because of how it looks. Here I have my loofah, which is still climbing over, and one of the blooms is actually open right now. It looks so beautiful. I never knew what loofah flowers look like, and I think they are some of the most dainty, whimsical, romantic flowers I've ever seen, and I love the color. One of my daughter's loves the color yellow, so every time I see any type of yellow plant or flower, I immediately think of her. But they're so beautiful. For a while there, these vines were actually declining rapidly, and that's because I didn't have enough drip tape set up in my 15-gallon container. So what I like to do is have the drip tape sort of coil around. That way the entire container gets an even amount of water, and I don't have a lot of dry spots and then wet areas, but the soil had become very dry, so the water wasn't actually penetrating into the root ball, and a lot of the leaves started drying up. The flowers were very droopy, and so I went in with and so what I did to resolve that was go in with a bamboo stake and just pierce the soil in several places. That way when the water came on again, it was actually able to travel through the little like canals or holes I had made. And now it looks a whole lot better. I hope that it continues to put on growth. I do see a few loofah that were starting to form, but I think due to the soil drying out, some of them have dried up. There are a couple more though that still look okay. I'm still gonna wait to see because I feel like I can't for sure say that these took just because it became so dry. Like here's another one and it's rock hard. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Next to that is my Cara orange. This one was also putting on quite a bit of growth, but it's also starting to become a little bit wider versus taller. And I think it looks really beautiful. I do see a little bit of sunburn here and there, which I'm not surprised by because most of my citrus trees have that, but overall it still looks really good. This one doesn't have any fruit right now, but hopefully next year we'll get a good amount. Next to that, I have my Moro blood orange, and this one also looks really beautiful. It's so interesting to me to see how vastly different citrus trees grow. So this one isn't very wide, it's more so tall and narrow, but it's still really pretty. And it actually doesn't have quite as much sunburn as my Cara orange. This is my Valencia orange, which is still pushing out some new growth. It doesn't have fruit on it, but it is putting on a ton of leaves and a lot more branches, so hopefully next year. And then next to it, I have a bell pepper plant. I had actually sowed some melon seeds in here as well, but they didn't really make it. I don't know what I did wrong, so I'm gonna go through and sow some more in a few days. And I'm actually really happy to see that this plant is actually loaded with some bell peppers. I think this is probably its third round of fruit that it sets. The first 2 times have not been the greatest harvest for me. The first one had a bunch of blossom end rot because it wasn't set up on drip. The second one, I got a couple of peppers, but most of them also had blossom end rot and a lot of sun scald. But I still got to harvest maybe 2 or 3. And now I see several more settings, so I hope that I can finally get a really good harvest. We'll still have to wait and see, but I'm very hopeful. And then back here are my bananas. So this is my Manzano banana, and this one is my Goldfinger banana. And these bananas aren't the newest addition to the garden, but they are the largest addition. They grow very quickly. They perform very well here in Arizona. The only problem I have with them is that, actually, no. I don't think I've uploaded the vlog yet, but I actually had to go through and remove all the mulch that I had here because the rodent issue, I know that this was their home base and I had to get rid of it, and I did, and it was extremely traumatic for me because I don't do well with rodents. I don't do well with anything other than plants pretty much. And in removing the mulch, I quickly learned that rats can run vertically straight up the wall, which I never knew they could do, but they can, and it was terrifying. But the bananas themselves look really great right now. I do need to go through and thin some of them out. Like my manzano has several pups here. Some of them I didn't notice because they were hidden underneath the mulch. So I want to make sure that I keep it down to maybe 2 because I want a really good harvest from them. It does make me happy that I can finally see the soil because now I know that there's nothing hiding under there. And once in a while I come in with my garden fork and just move things around just to make sure. Here I have my Mexican cream guava, and this tree looks all right. I feel like it still needs a lot more time to really fill in. I do see a ton of new growth coming in, which is awesome. For a while there, the rodents were burrowing into the container, so I had to set up some traps, and I haven't seen any more burrows in a few weeks, so hopefully they're gone. Fingers crossed. Now that the bananas have been cleared out, I feel like this area of the garden won't be bothered as much. And hopefully one day they'll just completely go away. But in the meantime, this tree has finally started putting on a little bit more growth. I feel like it's kind of hard to tell because it's very tall. The branches are very narrow, but I feel like if I give it a few more months during the fall, it'll really put on some beautiful growth. That's what I noticed with a lot of my other guavas is when I first planted them, it took them a while to really start putting on that growth, but once they did, they just didn't stop. They just continued putting on more leaves and more branches. So hopefully that happens here too, because I really want to try the fruit. The melons are looking pretty good. They are not as big as I would like them to get. Some of them are starting to flower, but for the most part, they're just hanging in there, and I feel like I just need to give them time, and then they'll start to fill the trellis beautifully. And then here is Lenny the lemon guava. And as you can see, a lot of the leaves got sunburned. It actually looked a lot worse than this at one point. All the center was full before, and it was completely burnt off. So I set up a little bit of shade cloth for it using some bamboo stakes and some leftover shade cloth that I had lying around. And it's pushing out more growth right here, which makes me so happy because for a while there I felt horrible. I thought like most of my other guava trees, it would just handle the heat like a champ, but it didn't. And not only did the leaves get burnt, a lot of the fruit was starting to get burnt as well. So that was very unfortunate, but hopefully it recovers fast and we start to see a lot more growth and production from this little tree. Whew. Remember last month when I said I wasn't going to set up shade cloth? I feel like June really humbled me. It showed me how intense the sun can really get here, and if I can't handle being out here, I know a lot of these tropicals can't as well. So first up against this trellis, I have my beans and my coral vine over here, which look okay. The beans look a lot better, but I think because I moved them, their tendrils need to get accustomed to climbing up over here. I have some pretty small plants in a really large container, and that's just so that they act as placeholders until the winter comes, at which point I'll purchase a bare root David Austin rose. I think I'm going to go with the Eden, but I'm going to look at all my options because I feel like I change my mind so often and I want to choose a perfect one for this location. But I have wanted an Eden for a really long time, so we'll see. But that will go over on this side, that way it can fill this side of the trellis, and then we have roses everywhere. I'm someone who really loves symmetry. It doesn't have to be the exact same color, the exact same shape, but I do like symmetry a lot. And when I first came up with the idea of having roses on the back porch, I thought I would cover the entire porch, which is a lot bigger and wider than the trellis that you see right here. So I thought about having coral vine climbing up one side and then the roses climbing up the other side to meet in the center, and then the coral vine could sort of intertwine itself with the roses. But that project didn't really work out, so I came up with this trellis that you guys see here in the front. And because it's a lot smaller and not as wide, I'm not in love with the idea of having both coral vine and roses on here because I know coral vine is going to grow like crazy and I think it's going to overpower the roses. So I really want roses on both sides. And even though I tried to step away from my love of symmetry, I just feel like I had to come back to it with this project. In the back, I have my Mexico La Grande avocado, which which looked a lot better last month, I'm gonna be honest with you. And I feel like this is the one avocado tree that has given me so much trouble because ever since I planted it, I dealt with a lot of salt burn. The tree was just so weak from the way it was staked that it just continuously flopped over. And whenever we had not even crazy strong winds, but just any sort of wind, I was terrified that it was just gonna snap one day. So I did the same thing that I did to my Fuerte avocado where I cut it back significantly to try and strengthen that trunk and allow it to branch out. But then a few weeks later, I started seeing a lot of salt burn again. As you can see here, that plus the heat plus the intense sun just was a recipe for disaster. And then I think I figured it out. So one thing I've heard with a lot of avocado growers is they sort of mount their trees, right? Because their root balls don't like staying wet for very long. They want really well draining soil. And when I first added the irrigation, I had it coiling around very close to the root ball. And I think that was just saturating it way too much. And that definitely added to the salt burn. So a few days ago, I came in and I removed it. Ooh, actually, let me take off these suckers. So a few days ago, I came and pulled it back. That way it's not so close to the root ball, and immediately it started pushing on a little bit more growth. I think my little Mexico La Grande avocado is a good example of the learning process it takes to grow trees, because sometimes some trees just leave me stumped where I'm like, what's wrong? I tried increasing the water, I tried decreasing the water, I tried adding shade cloth, I tried doing this, but you still don't look happy. Like, what do you want? What do you want? And sometimes it's several factors, and sometimes it's only one simple little fix. And I think in this case, it was just that I was watering directly on top of the root ball, and the tree didn't really like that. And the reason I noticed that is because I started staring at the two trees, at my Mexico La Grande and my Fuerte avocado, and I was like, you guys are planted at the same time. They were about the same size. They have the same potting mix. They're in a little bit of a different location, but my Fuerte avocado has no salt burn. This one has significant salt burn. And then I realized it was the way my drip was set up. So you live and you learn. And then behind me, I have some more shade cloth along with this dragon fruit trellis structure, which I didn't film because honestly, it was really hot that day. I was certain I wasn't gonna do a good job, and I still don't feel like I did a good job, but I used a bunch of scrap wood to create the structure to hold it up. And the reason for that is because this branch broke off. And I haven't been that great at propagating it because my kids keep ripping it out. But I was trying to hold off from building some sort of support system for it because I feel like it's so bulky, but it does the job. It's kind of hard to see right now, but it's pretty much just a square at the top with some support on the sides, and then I'm still tying up the dragon fruit every few feet as it puts on new growth. Well, let me see. Let me take this off really fast just so I can show you guys. I've pulled it back as far as I can. So normally I don't have these bamboo stakes. They're just here to hold up the shade cloth along with some clothespins. But this is what the structure looks like. It's not very pretty, and I don't know if it'll be a permanent solution. Probably not, but it works for now, and it can actually start draping over, whereas before it was just starting to snap, especially with our crazy winds. And monsoon season is right around the corner. We had rain not too long ago, and it was magical. But we have been having some really crazy dust storms. So whenever we have really windy days, I stare out my window, and now I feel happy seeing that my dragon fruit isn't going to be snapping all over the place. And it's going to have the support it needs. Next to it, I have my Ecuador Palora, which is also starting to put on quite a bit more growth, but I did start to see it yellow a little bit. And I think that's just because it was getting a lot more water. So I added some barred fittings to the irrigation. That way I can open and close it and control the amount of water it gets. Next to it, I have my pineapple guavas. So I know that for most varieties, you need 2 of them to produce fruit, but this is a Coolidge variety, which is supposed to be self-pollinating. I wasn't 100% certain for a while there, but I finally found the container and it says the name on it, which makes me super excited because I really don't want to get a second one. The main reason being that I've never tried the fruit, so I don't know if I'm going to be obsessed with it or not. I'm pretty sure it's going to be delicious regardless, but I also don't have a lot of room for any more trees because I've kind of maxed out my space. So I have to stick with one, but I'm happy that it's a self-pollinating variety. It did have several blooms a few months ago, but all of those dropped because it wasn't set up on drip yet. Now it is set up on drip, and you guys can see all the new growth it's put on. It looks really happy, it looks really lush, and it's got a ton of growth down at the bottom that I need to prune back. Also, before I forget, I have 2 smaller containers down here that are also set up on drip. Look at all this basil. My kids noticed it the other day and they were like, can you make us pesto pasta? And I was like, of course. So I want to surprise them with it. This makes it feel like summer because during the summer months and even in the fall, one of their favorite dishes was pesto pasta. And the one plant that they never have to ask me the name of is basil. They know exactly what basil looks like. So So I owe them their favorite dish. And then behind that I have some alyssum, which is starting to flower and it looks so beautiful. I still have 2 containers here in the front that don't have any drip, that don't have any soil in them, but I will be adding some herbs soon. But before we do, I need to talk about the elephant in the room here, which is my shade cloth structure. So I said I wasn't going to add shade cloth. I was adamant about that. I had this plan to plant some really tall sunflowers and then just go down in layers. That way I wouldn't need any sort of shade structure. But again, June really humbled me. My garden started frying. All of my tomato plants, pepper plants, everything in the garden, well, almost everything in the garden, wasn't looking that great. And then eventually the sunflowers started dying back and there was nothing left covering the rest of the plants. So one day I finally had enough. I came out here, I set up the shade structure, I built the front half and my husband built the back half, and it's made such a difference in the garden. Not only does everything look a lot better and greener, but I'm also able to come out here once in a while to harvest things, which I wasn't able to do before because there was just way too much intense sun shining down every single day. But I really like it. One of the main reasons I didn't want to set up shade cloth is because in the past years, I've made the structures way too short. And whenever I did that, especially because I have a ton of trellises, what would happen is the shade cloth would eventually sag down, especially when there was really strong winds, and it would rub against the vines on the trellises and sometimes rip the shade cloth because it would get stuck to the trellises, and it was just such a hassle. So I didn't want to set it up. And now we have quite a few feet of clearance so that the plants get enough sun protection, but they also get enough airflow. And I really like it. Now we can finally make our way into the garden.